All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. First off, thank you so much, everybody who came out. This event is sponsored by the Public Interest Law Society, as well as the Multicultural Legal Alliance, and we couldn't have done it without the Barrister Society. So we want to thank Professor Jonathan Rapping that is back there, and of course Attorney Crystal Red for coming and talking to us about public interest. The goal with community conversations, which is what this event will be, and continued events throughout the semester, is to have a conversation. So while you guys are listening to the presentation, if you want to write down any questions you may have and save them for the end, we're going to kind of do an open forum at the end and invite you guys to ask Attorney Red any questions you may have. It looks like the pizza's here, so afterwards we will be giving you guys some pizza and refreshments, so feel free to stay after and enjoy that. Attorney Crystal Red is the co-director of Safe and Stable Homes Project, and she's an advocate for people in landlord-tenant, eviction defense, and wage cases. And we want to thank you for being here today.
Sure. Well, good evening. Again, my name is Crystal Red. I work at the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation, which is actually just diagonally right across the street from you guys up in Peachtree Center. So I had a very, very short commute over here this evening. And so I'm so thankful to the Public Interest Law Society, Gabriella, Emma, Barristers Society, Sam, and Professor Rapping for having me here today and just to have a conversation. So yes, I want to present, but I definitely want you guys to engage. You don't have to wait for questions at the end. If there's something that you have a question about, please feel free to raise your hand. Let's have a conversation here. But I did want to talk a little bit about, just introduce myself, tell you a little bit about my background, how I got to the place where I am. And specifically to think about things that you can do as a student, as a law student who perhaps is interested in public interest law, who's interested in exploring that field. Maybe some of you came to law school and you knew right when you got here, or even before you got here, this is exactly what you were going to do. You're going to serve people. And maybe some of you, you were not sure when you arrived at law school, which is fine too. I definitely say explore all the opportunities that are out there, but this can be an entrance and an introduction to what it means to work in the public interest space. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are 1Ls? Okay, 2Ls? Okay, any 3Ls? Okay, all right, so pretty good mix. So I always knew that I was going to work in this space. Part of it is about the religious background that I had, the way I was brought up, where service was absolutely a way in which to show, to demonstrate to others the role of Jesus Christ in our lives. Now, when I was younger, I was brought up in the church, and service was something that I did every single week, it seems like, just serving my community. And I also had strong examples with my parents and with people where I live. Now, I come from a background that's not very different than the background of the people that I serve. Working class, parents, my mother worked in a telephone factory. My father worked in a men's clothing store and owned his own janitorial service. And I spent days during the week helping him to clean offices after school. So I always knew, and it was instilled in me, like this value of service, what it means to serve other people. The other thing I think I would say about how I got to where I am is this idea that I was always aware of when things were unfair. And I don't mean in the unfair way of like you're a young child and you're like, that's not fair, and because you don't get your way, so to speak, but more so in the idea that when something appeared not to be fair for others, like one group got something that the other didn't, it was something that really struck me as being wrong. And so, and I'm not trying to, this certainly isn't like a holier than thou, but it is part of like how it is that I'm in this space and continuing to work in public interest. I've been out of college for 25 years, and the entire 25 years I've dedicated my life to public interest work. But I think for me, it's a lot of like how I was brought up And then I just took it to the next level, I think my family would say, with the work that I chose and the career trajectory that I chose for my life. So a little bit of background. So yeah, I am the co-director of the Safe and Stable Homes Project at Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. We do housing work representing people who are economically, politically, socially, racially marginalized in our society. And I would say that I've spent my entire life working with that same group of people. Again, it's people who look just like me, people who are familiar to me in my life, and live in the same neighborhoods just like what I came from. In that housing space, in the civil space, you're talking about disputes between landlords and tenants. You're talking about trying to correct what is a tremendous imbalance between landlords and tenants, the power that landlords have over the way in which things are done as it relates to tenants, the lack of rights that tenants have here in Georgia. And it's not a secret. I mean, I'm not telling you something that people don't know. If any of you are from the Northeast, if you're from the West Coast or the Midwest, you are probably familiar with tenants' rights that are much stronger than they are here in Georgia. Perhaps some of you rent and you know exactly what I'm talking about when you get into disputes with your landlord, and you realize that your rights are limited here. And that's a realization that people have a hard time dealing with, particularly if they come from other parts of the country. But we help to work on that imbalance of power. And that is, I think, that a theme throughout my life, particularly in the legal space, is about working to correct what is an imbalance of power between different actors, whether it's in the civil space, whether you're in the criminal defense space, civil rights work, that's part of what you see operating there. So yeah, that's my work at AVLF. I got to AVLF after working for many years at the Southern Center for Human Rights. It's a civil rights nonprofit organization here in Atlanta, just down this way too, going down towards 5 Points. I initially worked there as an investigator. I used to investigate capital murder cases in Georgia and in Alabama. So all of my clients were charged with murder and murder plus. And they were all facing the death penalty. I dealt with people who were going to trial for the first time, meaning that they had been charged, and so we were going to have a trial on their capital case. Or I represented people who were already on death row, and we were working on their appeals. As an investigator, the type of work that I did was investigating both for guilt, innocence. In capital work, you have two parts of a trial. You have the guilt, innocence, and that's what you see on TV in Law and Order, where the jury is going to decide whether or not the person is guilty or innocent. And then specifically for a capital case, you have the sentencing phase, and that is when the same jury is going to decide whether or not the person receives the death penalty or receives a sentence other than death. And so I investigated both the first part of it, interviewing the people who saw a red car speed away at 10 o'clock at night, collecting documents, evidence that would go to disprove or challenge the case that the prosecutor brought. And then I also spent the bulk of my time working on the sentencing phase. So mitigation, what you're talking about there, you're talking about anything that would make a jury believe that the person, our client, should receive something other than a death sentence, that the jury would be convinced that this person should not have their life ended by the state, that they should in fact live, that there was a life and a humanity and a dignity that they have as a human being that should be worth saving. And I used to tell people that I would, if you think about your own lives, I would talk to every single person that you've ever known in your life or attempt to, from your friends, your teachers, your partners, girlfriends, boyfriends, every single member of your family, your employers, if you were in the military, your people who you were in the military with. I would try to collect every single piece of document about the individual to help in telling their story of who this person is and why they should get a sentence other than death, to bring forth the humanity that each person has. And so in doing that type of work, putting forth the information again to prevent the person from receiving a death penalty. So yeah, that's when my first iteration of being at the Southern Center. So I have quite a bit of experience working in the capital space, capital criminal defense space. But even before I got there, I had the pleasure of being at the Public Defender Service, which is how I met Professor Rapping, oh goodness, 25 years ago. When I was an investigator. I was so young, look at me now. But
We were so young.
that's how I met both Sam and Professor Rapping, working at PDS, the Public Defender Service of DC, where I was an investigator there and investigated cases. The DC does not have the death penalty, but I investigated all types of criminal matters, from more minor criminal charges to murder cases. And my work there is actually, I was recruited to then come down to the Southern Center. It was a path that a number of different people had taken working at PDS. And then the director at the time of the Southern Center, Steve Bright, who's an expert in the capital space, some of you may have heard of him. He recruited a lot to get good investigators to come from PDS to come to Atlanta. And so I moved here specifically to work at the Southern Center. There came a point when I was at the Southern Center that I was completely burned out from the work that I did, emotionally, mentally draining, which I'm sure you could probably imagine with the heaviness of the work that we did, also recognizing how important the work was that we did. And then I became a teacher. One of the reasons that, remember I said that when you do mitigation work, part of what you're going to do is you're going to talk to every single person that our clients and our people that we're representing has ever known. And a key group of people are their teachers, because the teachers can tell a lot about, particularly if the person perhaps has some mental health challenges or intellectual challenges that would have come forth as a child, or there was chaos in our clients' homes and things that exhibited themselves in school that teachers could tell you about. So I remember one of the first cases I worked on, I was responsible for interviewing all these teachers, and these teachers down in like South Georgia who had been teachers for like 30 plus years or something like that. And I had a client who had a number of siblings. And one of the things in working in the capital space, people would say, well, why is it only your client is being charged with a case for which they can receive the death penalty? They have siblings who do X, Y, and Z. Maybe they've gone on, they've had families. And it's kind of cliche, but it really does make a difference when those siblings had a teacher or a preacher or someone in the neighborhood, their Girl Scout or Boy Scout leader. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it actually is true, that you would have people who perhaps would take a sibling underneath their wings and really make a difference in kind of helping to guide them. Maybe they saw the chaos in the household or all the things that the client and their family was dealing with and took them under their wing. And then one person who perhaps did not have that same type of connection was the person that we were representing. So I remember one of the first cases I had, I was talking to all the teachers, and I knew that at some point, what you're really seeing here is the difference that a person can make in someone's life in that particular point in their life. And so when I decided that I was going to move on from the Southern Center as an investigator, I did teaching, with this idea being that if I could make a difference somewhere earlier in my client's life, Not saying that I'm going to be able to put everyone under my wing, but if I could do something in their life, be an inspiration, or just, pour into them, pour positivity, pour love, and all these types of things, is there a difference that could be made so that they are not somewhere down the trajectory where I would represent them when they're facing the death penalty or facing a criminal charge. So I became a teacher. And worked here in the state of Atlanta, right over near Greenbrier Mall. And again, children who looked just like I did. The school was 99% black. The neighborhood looked just like I did. Yeah.
What was the name of the school you taught?
Fickett Elementary School. Okay. And so are you familiar with that area?
Thorough for a year.
Oh yeah, we feed into Fickett. I'm sorry, Fickett feeds into Thorough. So yeah, I was a teacher for 7 years, and I loved teaching. I felt that I was at least making a difference. I was at least putting positivity into my children. Because of the background that I had, I knew what it meant when children were struggling with different things, including instability in their homes, instability in their families, and just to try to, obviously the impact that would have on their own educational achievement, what they brought each day to school. But then there came a point when I was like, I want to do more than work in the classroom. I want to even do more than be over a school, and I felt that going back to law school was a way in which to have another tool in my toolbox to be able to advocate on behalf of children and the communities, children who look like me and the communities like where I'm from. So I went back to law school. And so I went to law school. I don't know how many of you, how far you are from your undergraduate experience, but I went back to law school after 12 years. So I was an older student, that's what they called me, but young at heart. But yeah, I went to law school, and like I tell people, I think it's kind of funny. I went to law school and like lived in the dorm. I mean, I owned a house here in Atlanta, and I lived in a dorm in law school and took showers in the communal shower with shower shoes on and all this stuff, and it would just kind of made it like a hilarious thing. But very similar to like what I said when I first started this conversation was like, I knew when I went to law school that I was not going to do corporate law. And this isn't, I hope no one sees it as judgment. I'm just telling you, like, I had a very particular path that was not necessarily laid out for me, but it was something I was always committed to. So when I went to law school, I knew that I was going to do public interest law. I knew that I was going to take advantage of as many of the opportunities as I could to be involved in student groups related to public interest, to internships or externships, to research different types of opportunities, to go to talks about any and everything. I was happy because I was like, I went to law school after working full time. So like the idea that I could just walk around with my backpack and just like take in information was really exciting to me. So yeah, so I went to law school, and it was a beast. And I'm sure you figured out that there are many days that are not fun, and hopefully sprinkled in there some great opportunities that you can take advantage of. And I definitely want to come back to that. But yeah, just to put a bow on it. So graduated from law school and actually came back to the Southern Center as an attorney. And in between that time, I did Gideon's Promise. So I came right back around to professional rapping, being part of a community of people, of public defenders, working in this space, in criminal legal reform, challenging the way the system operates, making sure that, again, we stand in this place of righting a serious power imbalance that exists, particularly in the criminal defense space. So I went back to the Southern Center as an attorney. In that space, worked on believe it or not, had one of the capital defense cases that I had served as the investigator on. I came back and worked as an attorney. That gives you an idea how long these capital cases can go on. Worked in the space of juvenile justice issues, representing young people in facing juvenile charges, and also trying to work to reform that system. Work in the space of indigent defense, saying that the right that people charged with crimes, the provision of legal counsel that they have should be of a certain quality, should be of a certain, it shouldn't be in name only, that there are ways in which we should challenge the way people are herded through our legal system without serious representation or representation in name only. I worked on jail and prison conditions, so challenging. It's so interesting. I don't know the extent to which you've been paying attention at all that, the Fulton County Jail has had many, many, many deaths. It should shock us that people who are incarcerated and held in cages are dying, but it doesn't. And we as a society should be appalled that people are dying who are incarcerated. One of the things I talked about, I tell people, I worked in about conditions at jails. The Southern Center had many cases at Rice Street at the Fulton County Jail, but I talked to people about the jails and prisons that I worked in that were in the middle of nowhere. And there's a reason that those prisons are in the middle of nowhere. It's so that they are away from everyone else, so that we don't think about them, so people get carted there and we don't care. And then the atrocities of what happens there does not impact us on a daily basis. And the people who are incarcerated and their family members who care about them are people who don't have the right amount of power to really make a change. So I would definitely say to pay attention to what you're seeing. I mean, it is interesting. I'm not naive about the fact that the existing legal matter about the 2020 election and how many people had to go through Rice Street, the Fulton County Jail, perhaps is coloring how much press that you see about that. So that should make you think too, because I remember the week that different people were turning themselves in, they were talking about I think it was a week later, another person died, and they were like, oh, just a week ago, these people were here getting processed through the Fulton County Jail. And so anyway, and after working there as an attorney for about 4.5 years, I transitioned into now the civil space. So all that's to say that I can talk to you about working in the civil space, working in the criminal space, working in the education space, because I actually thought at one time about doing education law. But to tell you a little bit more about my law school experience, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you guys about, is definitely taking advantage of the different opportunities that may be available to you. Yes?
Sorry, just really quick, could you elaborate briefly what education law looks like?
Sure. There's a couple different ways that you could do it. You could actually work for a school system. So the school system that so APS, the Atlanta Public Schools, they have a legal department. They're going to do things as mundane as probably dealing with legal matters, perhaps something related to a child or to an employee that is a legal matter that comes up that way. You could also work on issues related to special education. The civil space that most people are familiar with is legal aid or legal aid society, the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, or legal aids across most major metropolitan areas, or sometimes they cover the state. here in Metro Atlanta, you have the Atlanta Legal Aid, and they cover the metro counties, and then you have what's called Georgia Legal Services Program that covers the remainder of the state, or what you would think of outside of Metro Atlanta. So you could do, I know they have opportunities to work in education if you want to support parents who are securing the rights that their children have under laws related to special education. So when children have an IEP, and you help them to ensure that they get the services that they are, the services that they are, I'm sorry. We just met recently, and so it's so good to see you here. The services that they're supposed to receive under federal law related to their children being having special needs. You also can represent children in this space. One of the things I used to work on, at the Southern Center, was related to juvenile justice issues, and one of the things you really saw was children being doubly charged with about a particular action. And that's because if it was an action that was related to school, they were disciplined through the school. But then if the school, or if the law enforcement also pursued charges through the court system, they suffered, they were basically doubly charged. So they were disciplined at the school level, and they were disciplined through the juvenile justice system. So that's a place within education that you could work to represent children, particularly charged with infractions or based on behaviors or actions that are based at the school. Another place where you see, like, if you want to work on versus like individual cases in the education space, working on things like education policy, to the extent that, so right now I'm telling you all about like representation in the sense of either individual representation, class actions. When I was talking about the jails and prison conditions, I'm talking about class actions, large scale litigation that would be brought. But a policy, if any of you are interested in policy, definitely a place where your skills as an attorney and your background as an attorney can be very impactful as well. If you don't ever want to see a courtroom, that's perfectly fine, but you can certainly go about affecting change in other ways, including in policy work. Is that? Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I had made a couple of notes just about things that I think about being a student. Again, thinking about it as I was 12 years removed from my graduating from college. I had gotten my master's degree at Georgia State while I was teaching, but as far as like just all I have to do is think about school, I would definitely say any and everything that you could go to. If you are remotely interested in something, go to a talk about it, research into it. I mean, you are in the city of Atlanta where you do have a community of activists, a community of people who are at least, who have committed their lives to changing the way that things work, who have committed their lives to addressing the power imbalance that I keep repeating. So look into those organizations, see when they have talks. I know that the pandemic changed a lot of different things, but I feel like people are now coming out, evidence of this, people are coming out and doing things in person. I will say one thing about the pandemic is that you did have so many opportunities that you could just go on Zoom and look at something that was a group that was presenting about X, Y, Z from across the country. And so, you know, I think you can find a variety of opportunities. If you are remotely interested in something, a particular topic, do the research. And I know you're a law student, so I'm not saying that you got to spend all of your time doing research. But if it's something that you see an interesting talk, an interesting event that's going on, I would say look into it and attend to the extent that you can. I know that the law school, I'm sure, brings people here to speak. Other law schools, you know, different opportunities there. You're in a metropolitan area with so many different schools that I think that there are opportunities for you to be exposed to many different people and different topics. The same thing with that. And again, attend events only to the extent that it doesn't, we don't want anything to jeopardize your actual education and your studying and things like that. So I'm not saying go to an event every single day, but if there is something that interests you, I encourage you to look into it and go to different things. I also put on here taking advantage of being in Atlanta for the very reason I was just saying. The nonprofits, the civic engagement. I mean, the world's eyes are on the city of Atlanta right now for a very particular reason. and also another reason, I mean, to the extent that if any of you are paying attention to the Stop Cop City, effort, if you are interested in, I think what people are seeing there is the impact of organizing and what it means that people come together about a particular issue and challenge what's happening. I also think about things related to when we think about in the voting rights space. I mean, 2024 is going to be here soon enough. And, we have people saying that you can't give out food and water to people standing in line. And what that means, that you have like the ACLU of Georgia challenging that and other groups challenging those types of things. In the space of, I feel like every hot button topic is like happening here, from issues related to the ending of abortion rights to rights for LGBTQ individuals. There was just a case that there was a case that's going through the federal courts right now related to that. So I feel like any particular topic, particularly hot button topics, you can probably find it operating here in the city of Atlanta. So take advantage of that, lean into that. Other things I had, they had asked me about, like volunteer opportunities. So I'll speak about AVLF because I would love to have you guys come and work at AVLF. So with AVLF, we have a number of different opportunities. We have summer internships, we have term time internships. I'm the co-director of the housing. So if you're interested in housing work, let me know. I have my cards and I can definitely leave them with you guys. If you are interested in that, I would love to follow up and speak with you. And even if you're not interested in housing, if you just want to continue the conversation, I'm happy to, because I really think it's important. The same way like people like Sam and Professor Rapping, poured into me and gave me different opportunities and provided me information. I feel it's really important for me to give back, so I try to speak with students and connect with students as much as possible. So even if it's not specifically related to what I do, I'd be happy to try and connect you to people that I know who may work in the space that you're interested in. But specifically at AVLF, we have what's called the Housing Court Assistance Center, which is where we have attorneys and paralegals who work in the court to assist tenants who are coming to court related to a housing matter. Usually it's that the person, an eviction has been filed against them, and so we're helping them to respond to their eviction, answering questions that they have about potentially representing themselves. Also, if they have just any legal question about housing. It may not be that we're able to answer everything, but it's like advice and counsel. So like a brief advice and counsel where they sit down and able to talk to an attorney. And we have opportunities for students to be able to participate in that process. You will shadow along with the attorney, and you're able to participate in the conversation and learn more about the housing space in that way. We also have what's called the Saturday Lawyer Program. So that's the oldest program at AVLF. AVLF has been around for about, I think it's 47 years at this point. No, sorry. I think it's 45. And it is the foundational program with AVLF. This idea that people are able to come on a Saturday morning and they're able to meet with an attorney and speak with them about their housing issues. So very similar to the clinic that I was just describing, the one that's down at the courthouse, but this is on Saturdays.
And these Saturday meetings are pro bono?
So it's so the way that AVLF works, they marshal the resources of the pro bono, the volunteer attorneys, pro bono attorneys from across the Metro Atlanta area to represent people. So hopefully it's that they will accept their cases, and most do, and represent them, either defending tenants when they're facing an eviction, if they are dealing with horrible, deplorable conditions in their homes, writing demand letters, filing lawsuits against landlords to seek changes and to seek repairs, in their homes. We also deal with issues related to return of security deposit, like if an individual moves out of their home and their security deposit is not returned, we pursue that. We deal with issues related to when landlords retaliate against tenants because the tenant has complained about the horrible conditions in the home. So yes, and with the Saturday Lawyer program, similar to the Housing Court Assistance Center, students are paired with an attorney who will conduct an interview, and then there's usually volunteer paralegals and volunteer students who are a part of the meeting as well. We have it, pre-pandemic it was in person every Saturday, but since the pandemic, during the pandemic, we moved to fully virtual, and then now for about a year, we've done it where we do in-person one Saturday a month, and then the other Saturdays are virtual. So it's something you could be on Zoom, and you could participate in the conversation. The way the students play a role, they help to collect information, they help to take the notes. I've seen different volunteer attorneys do it different ways. I've seen volunteer attorneys who say, oh, okay, so do you understand what's going on? You go ahead and you lead the conversation, and I'll just chime in when needed. Or it's that the volunteer attorney leads the conversation, and then at the end, they may stop halfway through and give opportunities for the student or the paralegal to conduct the conversation as well. We also have, I think I said, term time and summertime internships. And that would just be a matter of, we don't have a specific program, but if it is something that you're interested in, we usually have students work anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 hours. You don't have to do 20, but I'm just, different people have a different range depending on their availability, where you have the opportunity to do things like legal research, traditional legal research and writing, doing client interviews, following up with clients about a particular issue, helping in collecting documents, helping attorneys who are preparing to go to court, helping to draft demand letters where you're demanding that the landlord makes changes in the home or addresses particular issues. And those are the types of opportunities that we have here at AVLF. And many nonprofits, sister nonprofits, Atlanta Legal Aid, GLSP, Georgia Justice Project, the Southern Center, many ACLU have different opportunities for internships. So if you're interested in any of those, and it may not be something that's a particular program, particularly during the term time, fall and spring. But in the summer, they may have specific programs that you would apply to. So if you're interested in those type of opportunities, I would say to look into the organization and see what's on their websites about student opportunities. Because I think most of the programs, most of the organizations I'm familiar with, and they have those type of opportunities. I talked a little bit about my background doing both criminal defense work and working in the criminal legal reform space in a lot of different places, from individual representation to doing class actions. But I did want to just talk a little bit about what I'll call an expansive understanding of public interest, because obviously it can be traditional things like a public defender, working for a county as a public defender, working for the county as a district district attorney or assistant district attorney. It can be in the civil space, what I've called legal aid, and that's usually housing, benefits like Social Security, working in the education space, special education, things like that. Consumer rights, the idea that when when you think about scams or for mortgage foreclosure, those types of things, that's in that consumer rights space. Even the work that's been done related to the, what's the word? The tremendous amount of debt, student debt that students have, all of that work where those cases were challenging that, and getting the current administration to have like to do the forgiveness that was eventually, overturned by the Supreme Court, that came from consumer rights attorneys, so working in that space. Education special, senior law, elder law, if you're interested in that type of work. I know that Atlanta Legal Aid has a specific unit that's related to the types of issues that older adults would face, not least of which things like if there are issues related to their caregiving, issues related to their Social Security, and getting things like their pensions and things like that. And then home defense, I know Atlanta Legal Aid specifically has a home defense, and I think GLSP, the Georgia Legal Services, also has a specific where you're assisting. I work in the landlord-tenant space, but people who work in the home defense, foreclosures, scams that come out with people who lose their homes related to people taking advantage of them. Another category I just wanted to mention, things like government work. So I mentioned public defender, assistant public defender, but I guess I put those more in like the criminal space, criminal defense work or criminal prosecution, but also just like government work. Like you have city and county attorneys who, write the deals that counties do when they are purchasing land to building roads to everything in between. But that is a more expansive idea of like public interest work or working in the public service field, because you are in fact serving the public in that way. And then of course the many nonprofits that exist that that can be a way for you to pursue your different interests. I think really the sky is the limit on the nonprofits that work on issues. I think you can probably find many nonprofits for any issue that you're looking for. And like I said, definitely take advantage of the fact that you are in the city of Atlanta, where there is, I think, a strong nonprofit community where you have people who are dedicated to working on issues that serve others. So I know I've been talking a good little bit, but I want to take I just had a couple of notes I wanted to make sure I got through. But I also wanted to have the space open if there are questions that anyone has, or anything that I brought up that you wanted to follow up on, or maybe I'm crystal clear and made everything so easy to understand.
Could you share a memorable case or project that you've worked on that impacted
Oh my
the
gosh.
community?
Oh wow. I mean, gosh. Yeah, I think my work dealing with issues related to prison conditions, work at the Southern Center, where, and I know I talk about things like they have these prisons built where they are for a reason. They throw away the key, and no one's supposed to pay attention. That's how it's all supposed to be made. I think that's exactly how the powers that be want it to happen. And so when you have attorneys and investigators who will respond to these inquiries, like at the Southern Center, we would receive hundreds of pieces of mail a week from people who are incarcerated, people who are confined, and complaining about conditions and what was happening, and abuse. I mean, I'm not even giving like the full picture of it, but I think the fact that I think any time that you are saying, you are exposing that, you are challenging that, you are holding people account. I mean, this is your your government taxes go to this, and the idea that there are people who would be abused, who would be confined in the way in which they are confined, and that nobody thinks anything is wrong with it, the people who are the heads of the Department of Corrections ostensibly don't think anything's wrong with it, the people who are the wardens and the correctional officers and people who work in that space, I think bringing a light to that are cases that really mean a lot to me. At the same time, it feels like whack-a-mole, because how many prisons and jails are there in the city of, in the state of Georgia? And we were, the Southern Center specifically worked in Georgia, and at the time that I was doing this work, Georgia and Alabama. How many prisons and jails are there in the state of Georgia and the state of Alabama? Many, many. And so you may get successes or changes or things addressed at one, and the one that's 20 miles down the road is just as bad. And so, but I think the fact that you are challenging that you're challenging that seems perfectly fine and normal means something, because when we talk about people who are marginalized and whose rights are literally taken away from them as a condition of their own confinement, we should, again, I keep talking about like things like we should be horrified. We should literally be horrified that, because to be confined, to be incarcerated, to say that a person should be have a length of confinement does not mean then that that person should be exposed to the horrific things that they're exposed to in jails and prisons. That is not a part of what a person should have to deal with even when they're incarcerated.
Crystal, didn't you work on the Kamani Archie case? Was that as a mitigation person or as a lawyer? Do you remember that case?
Well, you were the attorney, so I wasn't. I was the investigator. Way to tee that one up, Sam. So yes, so Sam and I worked on a death penalty case here in the city of Atlanta, and without getting too much into it, like, I mean, there are parts of believe it or not, and this is how do I get into it? You probably have learned this, or maybe you will learn this in working, dealing with criminal law, but like, you know, so many prosecutorial discretion is incredibly impactful in any way in which the criminal legal system works. And so I say that because we handle very few death penalty cases here in the city of Atlanta, in Fulton County, in DeKalb. You would see where prosecutors would pursue the death penalty in cases outside of large metropolitan areas, and it's completely the discretion of the district attorney to decide. So you have, like, there's all this research about, like, you know, the vast majority of cases come from a very small number of counties across the entire country because it's the district attorney that's pursuing it. With that said, we had a case, because I didn't have any other case in Fulton County, but it was our client was charged with killing a Atlanta Police Department, Atlanta police officer, literally just less than a mile away from here. We were able to avoid the death penalty and did the incredible amount of mitigation, investigation for our client. And the difference that made, it literally was the mitigation that prevented our client from seeking the death penalty. Because if there are particular types of cases where I feel like it's pro forma that the district attorney will pursue the death penalty, and the killing of a police officer is one of those.
Right, so the reason I wanted you to mention that is because the lawyering really had nothing to do with the outcome of that case. It was the mitigation work. It was, getting to know the client's story, his history, his family. I mean, there was very little lawyering.
Yeah. There certainly are times where I would think, working in the capital space, where the guilt innocence may not be where you spend a bulk of your time. You're going to spend the majority of your time in mitigation because that's where you're going to save the person's life. And I would say, that mitigation work, I feel like I do mitigation work as a teacher. I think I do mitigation work here in the space where I work with housing, because I think it's about what more is going on, what is part of this person's humanity that colors what brought them to you for their legal matter. And I think, I'm not saying that you got to do a whole workup on a person like what we see in capital cases and all of, but I think there is something to be said for connecting with the people that you're representing, the people that are part of the community where you are working, to understand, I keep throwing out words like humanity and dignity, because those things make a difference. And it may mean that you spend a little bit more time than you may have really available to you, but that makes a difference to the people that you are working with. So yeah, I feel like things that I did in mitigation, values and principles that are at the root of mitigation work, I think I still do in other places of my legal work now. Other questions?
Can we just honor that?
Thank you, you're so sweet. Yes?
Circling back around to the housing, you mentioned that some people that you work with end up representing themselves, which brought to mind a question to me: what is the process of, say, fighting an eviction? What do they have to expect to try to do by themselves?
Yeah, and because the reality is that we are not going to be able, AVLF is not going to be able to accept every single case of a person who contacts us about an eviction. So we do have opportunities for brief advice and counsel through the Housing Court Assistance Center, through this eviction phone bank, where we link up volunteer attorneys with people to have a conversation about what's happening. Now, the key thing, there's a lot of closing informational gaps, like closing the information gap between what people know, like if they are from the Northeast and they think that they can withhold rent because of conditions in their home, because you can do that in Boston, but you absolutely cannot do that here in the state of Georgia. And if you withhold rent, the landlord will, file an eviction against you, sorry. So number one, making sure people have the correct information, because there's a lot of time I spend with people correcting misinformation that they have based on some other location that they're from or some other state. I think two is also understanding the process, because there are ways in which you can challenge whether or not the landlord followed the process. People may think of it as like technical things, but technical things make a difference. There's a technical way to do everything for a reason, so that if it's not followed to the T, it is a way to challenge it. So like when we have conversation with these brief advice and counsels, and I'm saying brief, but I don't mean like 5 minutes, I mean like 25 to 30 minutes you may spend speaking with someone, helping them to understand what the process is. What are the steps that the landlord had to take? What are the steps that the tenant has to take to respond to the eviction? Unfortunately, we see situations in Fulton County, you see upwards of pre-pandemic 45,000 evictions filed a year. It went down in 2020, and since the pandemic is going back up, and it's actually going to be more than it was in 2019 pre-pandemic. We're probably upwards of like 40 to 45, 47, 50,000 evictions being filed in Fulton County. And for a good number of people, they will never respond to the eviction. They'll get an eviction notice on the door, they won't respond to it, and then their rights are, they've essentially given away their rights because the landlord is, the few rights that they have in this space, they're giving them away because the landlord's gonna automatically win. So I think making sure that they know the steps that they have to take. And then, there are plenty of people who, while we certainly would love for people to have representation in every single space, and counsel is important for a reason, but counsel can appear in a number of different ways. And maybe, yes, we would love it if everyone we would love if there was someone standing next to every person who is facing the loss of their home. But that may not be possible. But is there information you can provide for them to be able to represent themselves? What type of evidence can they bring? If they filed the repair request, bring those copies. Everyone takes pictures. Everyone takes pictures and videos of rats and mold and all the deplorable conditions, and that can make a difference, that they can go to court and show that. So I think that there are definitely process, definitely closing information gap, definitely addressing misinformation, and then there are tools that a tenant can, with assistance from an attorney who may not be able to stand right next to them, but can at least counsel them in advance of their hearing, that they could represent themselves.
So, quick follow-up.
Sure.
What is the threshold for representation that you're looking at? Is there a certain say income level below which people qualify, or qualifications for it?
Yeah, so with AVLF is 200% of the federal poverty level. I believe Atlanta legal aid is the same. Most of the legal aids and like Georgia Legal Services, they're right around that area. So a person would have to qualify for our services for AVLF would have to be underneath that. Sure.
I was just gonna say Atlanta legal aid is 150.
Oh, okay. Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm thank you for mentioning that. So I work on the housing side, but Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation has a whole other separate part of their office. So I deal with safe and stable homes, and there's safe and stable families, where they assist victims and survivors of intimate partner abuse to file temporary protective orders, to pursue permanent protective orders, and who work in the family law space. So if you're all interested in that type of work, I can certainly steer you to them. My colleagues are fantastic and do tremendous work in that space. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different avenues that we can go into for public interest, but it sounds like all of them is very personal with how heartbreaking it can be and how close you can get with your clients. So what advice do you have, outside of what you mentioned, going to events and speaking with people, what other advice would you have for getting through, having to deal with those? Yeah. Vicarious trauma is absolutely a thing. And does everyone understand what I mean by that? Okay, sorry. No, I know I just threw that out there. Vicarious trauma is important for you to recognize it. It's important to be a trauma-informed advocate about the traumas that our own clients are dealing with, but then also how that impacts us. Self-care is very important, and I swear this is the pot calling the kettle black. I am do as I say, not as I do. As I've already mentioned 45 minutes ago that, I had to, I was burned out. There's certainly things that 25 years in this space and doing this type of work, there's things I think about I did in my 20s that I have tried to create more boundaries for myself at the age that I am now. And that's important. You want to be able to do this work and do it well. And there are going to be times when you have to recognize the boundaries that you have as a human being who has their own things going on in their own lives.
So self-care, like the idea that you would take time away, that you really do disconnect and take time to heal from what can be very difficult things to experience. I think finding, connecting with other people in the community to have someone who understands what you're going through and can be helpful in the space of providing something away from the work, the heavy work that we do. I think, so, and whatever it is that brings you joy on a day-to-day basis, whether that's time with your family, friends, a particular hobby or whatever, like you really do have to lean into those things. And I am saying this now, like I said, as a person who's worked in this space for a good bit and who did not necessarily do these things in my 20s. And I worked a lot. Yeah, I worked a lot. In the nature of the work, I traveled all over the country to travel over Georgia and Alabama, travel over the country, like with the case that Sam mentioned. My client was from Pittsburgh, so I would go live in Pittsburgh for a month. And so yeah, I mean, but I think that I feel like young people and just people just in general, I think now take more seriously like self-care and what that means. And I hope people, I think that's a good thing. I hope people lean into that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it sounds like in your capacity as an educator, you were really able to pour social capital into your community and just be a good person to be around kids, I guess.
Uh-huh.
Do you feel like you have that same opportunity as an attorney, or is it different, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so there's a model of lawyering called like community lawyering. It's like a very specific model. And if you haven't heard of it or aren't familiar with that, I would definitely tell you to look into it. Because I think I do at this point, I work as the director of the housing unit. I work on issues related to policy. Like I spent February going up to the Capitol trying to get a tenants' rights bill passed, helping to testify and explain why this makes a difference because our tenants' rights here are not as robust as they should be. So I think about things like that that's connected to having a larger impact here in the housing space. But there probably are, and I'm connected to communities by the people that I serve. AVLF, we have community-based teachers and community advocates as part of the work that we do, where we have lawyers and community advocates based at APS schools, with the idea being that if a person has a housing issue, they can come right in when they drop their child off at school and come in and talk to the attorney. And, looking at that link between when children are living in deplorable conditions and they don't have heat or they don't have the air conditioning or they have rats or they have mold, and then the child has asthma that's then going to cause them to be sick, and then they're going to miss school, what all that means for their own educational attainment and their educational achievement. All these things are connected. Unsurprisingly, all these things are connected together. So I feel like that there's a connection to community there. But I think that there's certainly opportunities for us to be even more connected in more of this like community lawyering model, or a model that has at the root of it the community driving it versus the advocates. And it really does flip it on its head. I mean, I would say that how do I say this? I would say that many nonprofit organizations that work there are organizations that do community lawyering very well. And then, there's things that other organizations that does not have that model as their model, there's things that we can take from it and things that we could probably improve there to get more at the piece of what you're saying as far as making a difference for what the community wants and directing the changes they want to see. Other questions?
Can I ask one
Yes.
What do you think about what's going on with the budget and the Atlanta Housing Trust Fund?
Is this still taping?
Pause it.
No, I mean, so the Housing Trust Fund, one of the sources of those particular resources came from the sale of the Gulch, which is the large parcel in between State Farm Arena. Sorry, these arenas have all changed names, but like State Farm Arena and Mercedes-Benz, this large area that's going to get developed. And as part of so many different kind of land deals that happen in the city of Atlanta, the Beltline, you have to have as part of that the affordable housing. Let me get a little bit on the soapbox. The city of Atlanta is incredibly gentrified. This maybe is very not surprising at all to any of you. The city of Atlanta is very gentrified. We have a lack of affordable housing here. We want people to come in and be the teachers and the police officers and the service workers, and people could never be able to afford living here in the city of Atlanta because the way in which the exponential growth of luxury units, when I'm talking about luxury, I'm talking about like rental units, that people can't afford. People who are on a minimum wage salary or even a working wage salary or professionals. And that should bother us. So to the point of what happens with the money that comes from these different land deals and these different agreements that developers have with the city where they're going to put aside certain amount of their units and their properties to have affordable housing, it is not at all where it needs to be. And until we face that and until we not face that because they absolutely know that we don't have the amount of affordable housing units that we need to have, but that we really do something dramatic to improve it. And to your point about like what's happening with the trust funds, there have been ways in which there have been different, the money has been earmarked for in ways other than to create affordable housing, and that's a problem. Because this is what it's supposed to be for. So I think we just have to, I think people, advocates, tenant advocates who work in this space, tenant organizers. I would consider myself an advocate, but like a organizing group in particular. Community organizers, challenge, and they show up at the meetings, at, the housing meetings that will be like the third Wednesday at 11 o'clock. How is that possible just for regular people to go to, people who have to work and things like that? Again, I think all these things are set up this way for a reason. But yeah, to challenge and to demand that money is spent the way that it's supposed to be, it's earmarked for. It's still not enough. It's definitely not going to be enough to create the number of units that it needs to create. But I think we have to challenge what we see as when things are not being used the ways in which we were told that they were going to be used. So I think that's the best answer. That was a roundabout answer. I got on my soapbox a little bit.
Okay, well, we will definitely want to leave some time for, pizza and anybody who wants to talk to Crystal, Attorney Crystal Reddick personally. So just thank you.
Welcome.
So please stay for pizza. We have amazing people in this room. We have Attorney Sam Starks, and we also have Professor Jonathan Rapping, who is the founder of, as she mentioned, Gideon's Promise, providing resources for public defenders in Atlanta, and then, of course, Attorney Crystal Red. So please engage and talk. We also have the president of the Family Law Society here with us. We have Becca. So please feel free to talk to her if you're interested in family law. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Gabriella, can I also just give a plug?
Of course.
The Barristers Society, which provided pizza and drinks. Although they've also been very active in bringing great speakers to campus. When your Pills leaders reached out for a speaker idea, it was the Barrister Society that recommended Crystal Red. And so I really just want to give a shout out to the Barrister Society for the great work they're doing to connect our students to so many great lawyers in Atlanta.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that. I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you.